Hello again. Same shirt, same glasses, same hair, same couch. So same night. Um, so I hope that there's enough continuity in this recording that um, recording like this that you that it's fluid and it's easy to follow when we get close to week 1 and week 2 and we start to navigate that way. But we're going to start today. We're going to talk about theories. Now I'm going to just show you a couple of things before we start. Okay, so this is not you. Don't even know what that is. Okay. So here we have the theories PowerPoint. We are going to look at that, but there's the note sheet that's here as well. I'm turning off. I'm going to pause. So this isn't a required note sheet, but man, it helps just to have a way to navigate some of these theories, particularly when we start to look at them. Whoops, that should have a close parenthesis. When we start to look at them, what's the word? Wait for it. Sequentially. So for y'all, that's something you can use as we go through this or as you read. Or it can be something that you look at as well on your own time. So if I look here, sorry, I'll show you something else. Well, I'm going to post a reading. Actually, I hope that doesn't open. Okay. Okay, but don't open 2, just open 1. So I didn't want that to open. It just all takes forever. I have another reading. That's a chapter from a book, and it's just about a summary of theories. As I always will tell you, a little summary is not enough that you could base a paper on, but it can give you a sense of where you stand. So before we even start this, it's going to take forever. Let me see if I exist still. What I want you to do is think for yourself about what do you think causes juvenile delinquency, misbehavior, whatever it is, because that's going to tell you where you fit with the theories. When we look at things like what are called typologies, and these are different types of criminals, so if we have a sex offender typology, we would be looking at perhaps, gosh, my brain's fried. We might look at molesters compared to sex workers, right? Those are different typologies, but those are given to them. Those are people that after they offend, they're given a category. And the purpose of these typologies is to give us the opportunity to treat them, right? Well, that's not what we're doing with theories. Typologies are about how do we treat this person? Within the system. How do we treat them? What do they need? What evidence do we have regarding this type of offender? But when we look at theories, we're answering, why do we think they ever committed the crime to begin with? So this is before the criminal act in most cases. What do we think led to that moment? And there are a couple different thought processes on these, right? And we're going to go through those as soon as this loads, right? But they come from different points and different perspectives. Some come from a deterministic point of view, where you don't have an option, you're sort of a victim in your life, and that's not a victim because that's not the right term for it, but that you are somebody, it's going to open right when I do this. I know you are. You become, you don't have a choice in what's happening. It's just kind of who you are and how you are. That's deterministic. Whereas free will is there's a choice. So deterministic means that we would want to influence those causes prior to essentially your existence, or as soon as you exhibit those behaviors or those characteristics that lead to that. An example would be traumatic brain injury. If we know damage to a certain part of the brain causes or is heavily linked to certain types of behaviors that are criminal, then we might want to intervene early. That would be deterministic. But if we're talking about free will, then we want to influence the choice process. So we might want to make it more challenging to actually engage in the delinquency. We might choose to make it harsher punishment. Come on, this is driving me nuts. Harsher punishment if you engage in the delinquency. Can you just let me do my job? Didn't want to click that. Go back down. I don't want you. Nobody wants you. Okay, well, I'm gonna spend an hour doing this apparently. Okay. What happened was I got really excited at one point about the fact that some of these like little gifts or things would be so awesome and so fun, but now they just take forever for me when I want to open the PowerPoints. So you're thinking during this time period, what do you think causes crime? And so we're not talking about homicide. We aren't talking about cannibalism. We aren't talking about stranger rape or mass shootings or something that's going to be a little bit more unusual. What we're talking about here are, the typical crimes. What's happening when somebody steals at the beach, right? Why are they doing that? Why is somebody vandalizing a local school? Those kinds of things, right? What's more realistic? So we're going to look really clearly at some things that are what's the right phrase for it? Give me just a second to think of it. That are very endemic, I guess maybe is the word, to the United States. Here we have an interesting distribution of power. And within this power, it's very much modeled after a caste system. This caste system is such that people who have the money, right? People that have the money have the power. And we know that we have a history. I'm trying to hide this. Hide floating median controls. Yes. Okay. So money equals power, power equals influence. But there's more to it than that, right? There's more to it than that. We know that there are characteristics that are like, you're playing the video game, not on easy, but you haven't added the extra challenges to it. Something like being a male, right? Or being born into privilege, or having a strong family support structure, right? These are some kind of things that maybe come into play that can influence the money, that influence the power, that create the momentum and the policy change. This is really important to understand because our legal system does not act in isolation. Because our legal system does not act in isolation, we have these political entities that actually frame how we push people through the system. We would say everybody deserves a lawyer. And we say that in our Miranda warning of our rights. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be provided to you. What does that mean? The Supreme Court has gone through and what makes a good lawyer. And basically, it doesn't say that you have it. It's not basically, it doesn't say you get a good lawyer. It says you get a lawyer. You get a lawyer. As long as they're awake and certified, that's all that you're afforded. But if you come from a position of power or a position of money, then obviously the legal system is going to protect you more because you have access to more developed legal teams, whatever that might be. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about when it talks about who we are favoring. Now, this gets to be a little bit interesting contextually because our political climate right now is more than just divided. It's a little bit volatile. It's not the most dramatic we've ever had. Madison was pretty dramatic. But when we look at these here, we're saying that right now, because it's volatile and because information is so immediate and accessible, at this point, it's a little bit more interesting to watch because we're seeing how these decisions go into play, particularly when it comes to our different systems that are supposed to be independent of politics. Beyond the political context, we always have our economic context. Those are not sorted, of course, but we have this massive wealth gap. And when we talk about the wealth gap, I'm not even going to talk about the 1%, right? We're not talking about the 1% of the poorest. We're not talking about the 1% of the wealthiest. We're talking here about those that don't have access to services because they make just enough, or they fall into some sort of a point where there's they're not really middle class by access, but they are middle class, perhaps by number, and how we're misrepresenting that. So we're talking here about economic and social mobility. So let's look at things like the official poverty line. The official poverty line, I am not mistaken, for a single person, I think it was like 23,000 or something like that. And so for a very long time, actually, as a student, I was under the official poverty line. I was under the official poverty line after my husband died because I had 2 kids. So it was a single mom, 2 kids, and I was a student. So I was under the official poverty line. And so I had access to services such as free internet. I had access to services such as food support help. Those kinds of things were there and available to me. But if you step over that poverty line, and I'm talking $100 over that poverty line, it doesn't cover you. You don't have that same access. When we're talking about, and so you notice I'm saying it's not life below the poverty line, it's those that are living on the poverty line. I've taught in 2 school districts, both were very low SES, so they were high poverty areas. Poverty is measured in the United States in the school systems. It's measured by the percentage of students that have free or reduced lunch. Usually it's about 33%. It's considered a high poverty environment, a high poverty school. If they have, and it's Title I school, if they have over, it's, right about 33 to 35%, depending on who you read. But these schools had like 98% on free and reduced lunch. One had 67%. So we're talking high poverty. We're talking about social isolation, and we're talking about economic segregation. So what were the schools like there? Well, the schools there were taught, we had an extremely high turnover rate, an extremely high. First of all, you had a lot of first-year students with first-year teachers with alternative certifications. So you don't have, it doesn't mean that they aren't good, but you don't have the most experienced teachers coming through. These districts were farther away from the city center, which meant 2 things. It meant that in these rural communities, as teachers, you had to travel farther, so the expense was greater, but to get to the schools. But then secondarily, the families of the kids had to travel farther to get to the city center for work. And so there was this larger time frame where kids were unsupported or alone, or in many cases, they would actually go home. And take on a parenting role. I have to go home and watch my brother and sister. I have to go home for this things. I can't play football. I can't do this. Can't go to tutoring because I got to go take care of the kiddos. Healthcare access can vary. You might get healthcare support from the government. You might qualify for healthcare support from the government. One of the challenges with that is that there are very same issue with like the teaching and the education, right? When we see this point, we see that there are sometimes less experienced doctors working in these areas that actually accept government healthcare, and there are, and that's because the jobs aren't going to offer it. It's the type of jobs that you have when you're living on or below the poverty line typically are not going to be jobs that are supporting healthcare. A lot of cash jobs, or they are not like mobile jobs, I guess, transitional jobs. So you might go from cleaning a house with this company, cleaning houses with this company, or doing construction with this company, and just kind of bounce between. If we have a car, it's going to be a single car for the family. In many cases, you don't have the ability to take it to a mechanic. You learn to fix it yourself. But in that, you don't have you have shared rides. And this can be really interesting for kids, because if it comes to something like a doctor's appointment. So let's just go on the very most basic scenario here. Your kid has a doctor's appointment. They're going to miss school. If you miss, typically it's more than 10 days without an excuse note from the doctor, then that means that you are considered like high risk for being absent, and sometimes you can go under a contract. So you go to the school every day pretty much, and then you have to miss it for a doctor's appointment. At the doctor's office, let's say that the wait there is 4 hours. It's taking you you have to wait 4 hours because there's this long, there's a lot of little kids that are coming in with emergency scenarios. Your kid gets sick while at the doctor's office. Your kid gets sick while they're at the doctor's office. And so now they're going to miss more school. Or if one of the littles is sick, the baby is sick, who's going to stay home with them? The person who's making the money or the person who's just got school? I say that with quotes, of course, just got school. But when you need that financial support, you are going to rely on some of the kids, particularly those that are of middle school, secondary level, right? Those that are actually prime for juvenile delinquency. Nutrition in these areas, you've heard of food deserts, I'm sure. Literally in the area that I worked that had 97, 98% poverty rate, they had one gas station that served, of course, greasy fried foods. There was there were groceries, there were markets, but you had to drive about 45 minutes into Austin to actually get to those. So there wasn't cooking from home. Is that easier? Is that less expensive when you consider the time and the drive and those things? Or is it better to feed this 13-year-old growing kid who's just pounding down food? Is it easier to get, a $10 McDonald's meal? In these scenarios, sometimes that can be the better choice. A lot of their food is actually going to come from the school. Charlie, will you let the puppy in and put her up here, please? They will, a lot of the food comes from the school. So in these free or reduced lunch areas, these high poverty school areas, they often do free breakfast. In doing free breakfast, what is that? That's a granola bar, that's breakfast pizza, that's those kinds of things. It's not going to always be your freshest and most varied fruit. It's going to be, it used to be before Michelle Obama did her revamp, we used to be able to choose as long as they had a vegetable, and chips counted as a vegetable. And so, because it was a potato here. And so thank you. So the kids would eat pizza and chips. You're like, what are you doing? And then they had, oh, will you close the door, please? And then they could have fruit drink. And fruit drink was what equated to soda at that point. It did change a little bit, and they got things like, strawberries or broccoli or whatever it was. But that is assuming that the parents were able to apply for the free or reduced lunch, that they qualified for the free or reduced lunch, and that the children choose to take it. On breaks, the kids are not having access to these same meals. Oftentimes, you'll send them home with backpacks of food and those kinds of events or whatever. Churches will do support drives, et cetera, food banks, things like that. But when it comes to the nutrition that my kids get, by comparison to what those kids are getting, just because of where I sit now on the poverty line, the kids are they live a very different life. When you're driving 45 minutes and you're gone, you have two jobs and they're this far away, your kids spend a lot of time unsupervised. They spend a lot of time unsupervised. That same doctor's appointment, who gets the car to take the kid to the doctor's appointment? The person who's going to make the money at the job, or how are you going to get there? Now they do a lot of support for that if you're qualifying for the services where you can actually get an Uber ride, but that's only if you qualify for that. Those that are living in these homes are more likely to be victimized. We're talking about shared households. We're talking about unsupervised time. We are talking about sending a kid with your uncle. We're talking about health and drug problems. Oh, yeah. Psychological needs are there, and then there is a lack of social capital. So here's what I'm going to tell you about social capital. And this is a term you hear in sociology. Sit down and finish eating, please. Social capital is your resources, your network of people. So when my husband died, I was pregnant, and my mom basically just stayed with me. My brothers came over, they fixed the house. My mom came over and basically took care of the baby and me, made sure that I ate, did those kinds of things. Our nanny here does something very different. Her experience is very different. She had a kiddo and it was just her. She's kicked out of the household. She doesn't have, stable parents. There isn't a job waiting for her. There's not daycare. So she's trying to navigate all of these things while paying bills and taking care of a child. So that social capital can make a huge difference in your ability to move beyond the poverty line. So here's one kind of... Don't, or you do? No. Okay. Will you get her bone, please? It's down there somewhere. Um, when we start to look at the role of the family, because if we're saying that social capital matters and we're saying that your home environment is influential, and the political climate affects that, then what are we going to say that the family actually does? How are they socialized? Does that matter? Of course it does. But it's really difficult to define the level to which it matters because we can't pinpoint exactly causation. What we know is that it shapes their values, it shapes their personality. If you have a household, and I'll tell you about one family, they did a visit because the kiddo was not attending school. And they did the home visit, and the grandma answers the door in her, braless tube top, smoking a joint. And she's like, "What?" It's like, never mind, never mind. We know where it came from. And so, does a single family, does a single parent is a single parent going to be the cause of delinquency? Do we find that that's more prevalent in single parent homes? No. What we find is these other factors lead to these scenarios. These might be part of being a single parent, but it's not the single parent themselves that are causing this. So there's a very weak link if there's one at all. Okay, she needs water, Angel. Get down. And bring her water over, please. Okay. So this is a little bit different for us because we have a tendency to say that it's the family structure that does cause this. You hear about single parents, we need to get involved with single parents. And okay, maybe, but it's more about social capital and these other factors that coexist with single parenthood. So this concept of broken homes, like the missing dad and those kinds of things. Will you change this water, Charlie? I don't know, it's a weird color. No, that's gross. Please go change that water. What did I say? Look at my eyes. What did I say? Okay, so please go change the water. So a broken home would be some times when we see divorce, etc., and we say, "Oh man, this is super detrimental. This is so bad for these." Okay, go lay down in my bed, please. Turn off the TV. Okay. Okay, so look at my eyes. You're either awake enough to do what I say. You've forgotten where you're looking. You're either awake enough to do what I say, or you are too tired and you need to go to bed. You need to decide right now which is the truth for you. I understand. Please go brush your teeth and let's handle that in a minute. So these broken homes and this idea of divorce or abandonment and the cause that that has on delinquency is really not linked directly. We don't see a causation here. What we start to see, though, is that social norms are changing, which causes a change in the need, what types of resources are needed. The more people that are in a family, the more the resources are spread. And I'll give you an example of this, right? So I have 2 kids, one who's about to get in big trouble. I have 2 kids. My boyfriend has 3. So if we choose to combine our families, we automatically then end up with 5 kids, with maybe our income doubles, but our kids more than double in that scenario, right? So we start to dilute the resources at that point. This is super difficult to measure, the actual structure. What we know above all is that income matters and stability matters, that it doesn't matter who is home as long as they are stable and they have an appropriate income. That's what we see. So what about the actual relationships? This seems to be more influential, or at least easier to trace. What this used to say, well, I'm going to pause. I'm sorry. My kiddo needs to get in trouble. Okay. So one of the big things that happened is when women started to be employed, they were expected, that was considered to be like a detrimental to the family. And you can go back and you can see like things like, well, once women went to the workplace, nobody was at home with the kids suffered. What we have found above all else, hey, it goes in the green one at the back. Yeah. Yes. That that it wasn't about whether or not the mom was employed or the primary caregiver was employed. What really seemed to be the big difference was about whether they wanted to be employed, right? So it was about where they wanted to be versus what they had. So if they wanted to work and they were working, better for the kids. If they wanted to stay home and they were staying home, better for the kids. But when we started to see the cross is when we started to see a difference in the influence on the children. But it does influence parental supervision, because, and you've seen this time and time again, and whether this has been supported in research, I can't say. I can tell you that in colloquial terms, meaning that in just the way that people speak about it, you hear this frequently. It's that women are expected to parent as though they don't have a job and and work as though they don't have kids. And so these expectations within the workplace don't seem to have fully maturated to the point where we can have a working family. Sorry, I said that weird. My voice cracked. A working family member, both working family members, and consider that successful for the kids. But what kids see matters. And so when there's family conflict, when there's family deviance, then what we start to see is that that is going to spill over into the kids' behavior. Do we think that's because there's bad kids or because there's bad parents? Well, we don't know about the effectiveness yet, but that's one thing that we need to consider, and that's one thing that's an empirical question. I mean, you can research that, and it has been done. Nope, longer. It's just I don't know the research, the literature off the top of my head about the role of parenting versus children. I can talk to you about the theories behind it, but I have not read that research, definitely not recently. So from here, we start to look at the family structure, which we can't say much about, compared to family relations, which we know, go back please, which we know that there is some sort of influence with the relationship. We then can start to talk about the role of society, right? And we start to see, how do we socialize the kids and how are they managed? Now, child abuse and child neglect are areas where we really want to get in and help kids and help prevent these things from happening. But what we tend to focus on is actually a little bit misnomered. We are at bedtime. Thank you for your patience. We're at bedtime, and so there's a little bit of breakdown sometimes that occurs. So what we start to see happen is that when people want to support kids, they say that, these are the things I want to do for them. I want to stop child trafficking for sure. I want to protect them from drugs for sure. I want to keep them away from strangers who want to kidnap them for sure. But these aren't things that, go wash your face, please. These aren't things that actually happen very frequently. What is the trauma that most kids experience? If a kid is going to experience some sort of trauma or some sort of exploitation, what is it? Almost always it's child neglect. Almost always. And so we have a role as society, if we say that we're going to be involved in this parenting and this home process, to actually identify and support that. So why do we care, right? Why do we care about all of this? This is what matters. When we start to look at the actual theories of crime and we say, this is what I think causes crime, that's where we put our money. And so we want to know, what does Wilmington do and how do they get the information? And if we believe that these things, this theory is true, whatever it might be, whether it's psychological, biological, or social, we might still want to consider, does that represent our theme? And that is, does this represent that juveniles are amenable to change? So this is significant for us. So now we actually start the conversation. So here's what we want to pay attention to. Is this a deterministic or a free will theory? Is it focused on treatment or punishment? What does this theory say causes crime? What terms are associated with it? How is it used? And is its use effective? So here, let's look at deterrence and rational choice theories. Deterrence and rational choice theories. Deterrence is one of the originals, right? And what we're looking at here is saying that crime is, or delinquency in this case, is a cost-benefit analysis. Excuse me. Thank you. That it's a cost-benefit analysis. So when we make the consequences such that it's more beneficial to not commit the offense, then we are subscribing at that point to rational choice theories or deterrence theories. So hear me on this. I know that was kind of convoluted, but hear me on this. It would be saying that, okay, you're going to do drugs, you do the crime, you do the time. We're going to increase punishment for those that sell drugs to kids. Okay, well, that's deterrence. We're saying that you are making a rational choice, bounded rationality, probably, right, within the scope of your knowledge and your experience. You're making a choice about what it is that you want to do. You look at the choice and you decide that it's valuable. I'll give you an example from little Charlie, right? She got in trouble one night and I said, okay, we're going to have to end up in trouble. You know, we say pow pow, but she's never had one. And she's like, well, how many pow pows? She's making a rational choice. Is it worth it to not do this for, X number of pow pows? Right? And that's what we're saying. We're applying this here. We do see this applied in some of the more attractive programs to kids, particularly from parents. Please don't push the dog off the couch. She's just going to go eat more stuff. Put that down. Give her her duck. Give her her duck. So when we look at deterrence, we have primarily two types. We're looking at specific and general. Specific and general deterrence. Specific is when we try to deter the individual committing the crime. We try to deter the individual committing the crime. We don't want them to commit another crime or another delinquent act or another violation of our social norms. And then general deterrence is when we try to do it for the general public. An example of general deterrence would be the death penalty, right? If we put somebody to death, we are not then expecting that we need to even, I guess it is deterrence, but that level of incapacitation is not such. Get her toy, please. Lean over and get her toy. Is not such that it's not necessary, right? So why did we do public hangings? Well, we do public hangings because we want to make sure that everybody's ashamed, right? Why do we have the Scarlet Letter? Why do we post scared straight videos? Why do we I'm trying to think of something. Why do we have public shame signs like I bullied at school, right? Why do we have that? Because we are trying to deter others. And that's a general deterrence. So specific is for the offender and general is for the public. There are three components to deterrence: certainty, celerity, and severity. And this is in reference to the actual punishment. So certainty is the likelihood that it's going to happen. So let's consider illegally parking on campus. If every single time you illegally park on campus, you got a ticket and you knew you were going to get a ticket, then that is a certain punishment. It doesn't matter if it's only for $1. It's a certain punishment. Celerity is about how quick it happens, the swiftness. And so you park on campus and then they're like, bah! Every once in a while they pop out and they give you a ticket. It's quick. It's not certain, but it's quick. And then severity, of course, is going to be, in this case, like the cost. So your ticket might be $100, it might be $10. So the more severe, if you are somebody who believes in severity of punishment, then you would say that the more intense it is, the less likely they are to repeat the offense. What does research say? They say even with a less severe punishment, certainty is the most important component of these punishment tenets. There are other types, right? We're starting to look at crime prevention through environmental design. You have routine activity theory, which you've been exposed to. That's the triangle, right? You see the triangle of a capable guardian, a motivated offender, and then a suitable target. It's since been added to include more than that, but you see that. What we're looking at here, though, are free will determinants. We're saying that people are making a choice. And if they are going to make a choice to offend, then we have to make that choice easier for them to not offend. Where do we see this in juvenile justice? Boot camps, shock incarceration, scared straight programs are the epitome of these types of models. Scared straight programs, remember, have been shown to increase offending. Scared straight programs increase offending. Not only are they not effective, they actually increase offending. So scared straight programs are very popular with the public, very popular with the parents, but they actually increase offending. And this is where it matters that you have this research in front of you and you know what it is that your community is doing based on the theories that they subscribe to. so then if, oh, sorry, here's old, sorry, I didn't realize. So we go forward and we see probably, I think the most hangs we ever did public, I think it was 400 people, something like that. And we hung them for whatever the crime was, but with the idea that you took your kids to it and you would say, look, you don't do that. See what's going to happen to you. Scared Straight programs are based on the same thing. So if we look at this and we're saying we're looking at deterrence and rational choice theories, I think I spelled deterrence wrong. It's not. Maybe I.
And we have a grown-up toy, like a grown people toy, not people, just a grown-up toy for her.
That would be nice, huh?
Yeah, but she doesn't shoot me.
Oh, you want a fake person? I know. So are deterrence and rational choice theories based on determinism or free will? We're talking about choice, or are we talking about predetermination? Or not even predetermination, but just determinism. They're free will because they're based on making the choice to not commit the crime. We want to increase the cost of the offense and decrease the value or the benefit of the offense. So is this focused on treatment or is this focused on punishment? Punishment, right? We want to increase the punishment so that we can make sure that people don't want to commit crimes. Though we know that it's not about the severity, it's about the certainty of the punishment. So why do people commit crimes? Well, it's a cost benefit analysis. This cost benefit analysis here is saying that it's worth it to commit crime. So what terminology must you know? Severity, celerity, certainty, general deterrence, specific deterrence. That's what you need to understand with this. Those are probably the big terms. So how is it used in juvenile justice? We put hard punishments so that we can make the cost of the crime high compared to the benefit. Is it effective? Nope. Not as it is. Now I'm going to tell you a point where it is effective, and I'm going to go back to CPTED here. Crime prevention through environmental design, by far one of my most favorite things in the world. This is where you make it, you don't even worry about the offender, you just make it uncomfortable. So my favorite example of crime prevention through environmental design, if you have an issue where people are tagging walls or something, put on motion activated sprinklers because they don't want to get wet and it ruins their art. And so then they don't do that anymore in that location, at least. But it's doing the same thing, right? It's making it a high cost. Okay. So after the deterrence theories, we really started to see that it wasn't effective. And there's a lot of reasons that what we were doing wasn't great and effective, but probably because we were focused so much on severity. One thing that happened is with our focus on severity, people were unwilling to give the punishments. So, if you steal, I've got to execute you. Well, then I'm not going to say you stole, because to me, that's out of whack, that's out of balance, and I'm not willing to continue with that punishment. And so that's what we started to see kind of happening. And so what occurred was we had some people some scientists get involved and start to really look, and man, it's like, dang, because there's sort of a place for this, but it came from an ugly place. So they started to develop what was called biological positivism. And this was the idea that some people are just born that way. That's where they are. It doesn't matter whether you charge them $1,000, $100, or if you give them 2 tickets every time they park incorrectly. They're always bad is bad and bad will out. So they always will be that way. That has taken a turn. A lot of the characteristics and features that were used in biological positivism were associated actually with people of color. And so we start to see an extreme justification for some of our extreme disparity that was in place. So we could sort of have adopted biosocial theories in play to that. This is kind of interesting because it did take a hard science approach here. We did adoption studies. This is where one kiddo would be adopted out of we would know their biological parents' characteristics and features, and we would know about their adoptive parents, and then we'd look at the kids' behavior and see which they were more inclined to. So, for example, my son is adopted and his parents have addiction issues. His biological parents have addiction issues. His biological father is criminal, lifelong offender, life course persistent offender. And there's a lot of anger issues. So what they would say is they would look and say, okay, well, Tiffany doesn't have that. Those characteristics. Did the Ross, his dad, have those characteristics? And so now what does her son have? What does he do? That would be an adoption study. Twin studies are when you can look at two people, particularly obviously identical. Twins are better because you have the same DNA, but twins separated at birth, oh, ideal, because then you really have a nature versus nurture approach because you have the exact same DNA, and then you can look at that and compare it to the nature of the environment in which they grow. Measuring this can be really difficult. Like, how do you determine a loving environment? How do you qualify it, or whatever it is? Those kinds of things. It is a very deterministic view, and we saw it really take place and play in the 90s when we were focused on super predators. Sorry, I'm trying to hide this bar again. Hold on. Okay, there we go. I do want you to watch the Stick Up Kid. It is long, but the reason that I want you to watch it is because what his crime was relative to what happened to this kid is like a little bit crazy. But the idea was the law had just come out. Super predators were based on these were the juveniles that were going to be violent. They were going to be violent for life. There was nothing you could do with them. That's who they are. They were determined to be violent, and there was nothing that you could do with them. And so there were a bunch of laws passed where we were really hard on these kids with the idea that we were catching the super predators and preventing them. Well, the guy that wrote the book came back later and he was like, oh, I was wrong. But it was supported in politics. It was supported, that was what Hillary Clinton apologized for in the debates, and said that they were wrong. And we saw the Bush administration supported as well. And when we're looking at this, it was like, dang, we were way off. But we truly incarcerated kids in extreme environments, knowing ultimately that this was a debunked concept term. So how do we actually use it? Well, we can look at things like hormones. I mean, like we talked about before, the age crime curve really does follow puberty. Is that related to hormones? Are men more likely to be offenders because of testosterone? Well, those are good questions, and those happen. Conduct disorder is often described as a precursor for antisocial personality disorder, or what you might hear as, for psychopaths or psychopathology. Psychopathy is the word, by the way. Nobody ever told me that, so I never said it right. Psychopathy. Is that going to be able to be fixed, or is that just other?
Is that animal? You have a duck pet?
No. IQ is a factor. Nope, careful, Char. You're gonna get your face bit. IQ is a factor. We actually we test IQ when we put kids through, particularly before we will waive them to adult court. And 70 is considered what is now called intellectually disabled, ID. It used to be called mentally retarded, MR, but it's called ID now, intellectually disabled. And if your IQ is 70 or below, then you are considered unable to understand the nature of your crimes and to be culpable. So what about biological changes due to the environment? What if somebody lives in a toxic environment, like literally mold, asbestos, something like that? What if they have high cortisone levels because of constant abuse? What if they have traumatic brain injury? What if they have ADHD, right? How does this apply, and what do we do with this? So you're going to then go through the notes. Is this deterministic or is this free will? Well, this is deterministic. This is not about choice. This is about who you are. So does that make it treatment or punishment focused? A little bit of both, but mostly we're going to look at how can we intervene in these what can we do to make sure that's not who you are? What do they believe causes crime? Whoops. You should be able to answer that. What terminology do they use? How is it used in juvenile justice? Wrong button again, third time. And then are those treatments effective? Right? So psychological theories started I don't know, not the 50s, a little bit before, but we test with a couple of things. We test with the MMPI and the CPI. MMPI is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory or something like that. And then this is where we're saying that crime is a symptom. Delinquency is a symptom of a larger problem. We are not saying that kids are like the issue is crime. We're not treating them for crime. We are saying, okay, so you committed a homicide, right? Let's say it's the worst of the worst. You've committed a homicide. And so you've committed a homicide, but whatever got you to that point, we would consider that to be unnatural for a kid, unlikely for a kid. And so why would they commit that crime? And if we can figure out why they committed that crime or what that crime represents or what need that means for them, then we can solve it better. And these are often personality theories. This is what started with psychoanalysis with Freud. This is where he started all of his. We start to see diagnostics take place in these situations. Psychopathology, we don't call kids, we don't call anybody psychopaths actually. But with kids, we use that as a diagnosis of exclusion. Diagnosis of exclusion. I think that's what it's called. Where we've gone through everything else, we don't know what it is, so you have conduct disorder. What is one of the adults when you're considered a psychopath? It's actually antisocial personality disorder, and there's some others. But if we say that you have antisocial personality disorder, and I go through the checklist and I say what is one of the symptoms of, or what is one of the indicators of antisocial personality disorder, you were given a diagnosis of conduct disorder as a kid. Well, how do you get a diagnosis of conduct disorder? They don't know what else to give you. I mean, it's just, we don't have another word for it. So it's nothing else fits. It is treatment focused, but it's a little bit tautological. Tautological is about the chicken and the egg situation. Get down, because that's not correct. If we say that crime is a manifestation of a greater issue and we go to treat the other issue, what do we do about the crime? Right? Why are we intervening on the criminal side? And how do we know that the crime isn't what led to this other issue? So it kind of becomes this big question of what is effective. There's a lot of therapeutic means in place or medical means that are in place for this, but it just depends on what level of diagnoses and what level of treatment the kid has access to. Ouch. So in the background, this is a book that I normally have you read in juvenile justice. I just don't think 4 weeks is enough time for 2 books. So this is called, I've already forgot the first part of it. Ouch. Let me think of it. But it's about the kids that are the worst of the worst. Got the first word here. Anyway, it's dang, that's gonna drive me crazy. Okay, I'll fix it. I'll go back to it and I'll tell you. But it's talking about extreme therapy measures, basically where they are regressing the kids to the point where crime became the best choice for them or the met need for them. And they're trying to reset the kids. That is a very questionable therapy technique, but this is just a story that recalls that. So you read these extreme stories, and I mean, these are extreme, but you start to hear the reason. And the issue for the victim is obviously, why do we care about the reason? And so they kind of address some of that too in there. So you should be able to fill this out. You've written at the top personality, psychological theories, psych theories. Okay. I'm sorry, this gets to be, okay. It gets to be a little bit much. So what I'm going to do is go through these 2 with detail, but the rest I'm going to kind of fly through. And the reason I'm going to fly through the rest is because they're really intuitive. Social learning theory. This is different. Do I have it here? This is different than social bonds theory. And what do they have in common? Nothing. Hey, no. Good job. Okay, your dog is being Um, with social learning theory, most often we're going to talk about differential association. This is about the reinforcement and punishment, and operating within your peers, your peer influence. So it's not necessarily, it's just like saying it says everything is learned. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about riding a bike, or if you're talking about riding a bike, or if you're talking about robbing a store. It's learned the same way. You start by imitating or whatever it is, you have these signals, and it's either reinforced or it's punished along the way. And so it has value to you. And as it has value to you, you will repeat that behavior. And if it continues to be reinforced, then you will repeat that behavior, continue to repeat that behavior. This is obviously linked in the 1950s, right? This is where we're talking about Pavlov and B.F. Skinner, right? This is all based on reinforcement concepts and punishment concepts. But we're saying here that your peer influence is the most important. When you reach the age where differential association theory is applied, then we start to see that peer influence is a significant factor. That's the dog. She's nuts. I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to show you a puppy. Do you want to see it? The wildest puppy on earth. Show them. Naughty. This is what we call a naughty dog. Oh yeah, now she's an angel. So social learning theory is saying that you are born good and you learn to be criminal. Now hear me. You're born good and you learn, I can't see, and you learn to be criminal. You're born good and you learn to be criminal through reinforcement and punishment and other means. Whereas, saying the same thing. Shh. Social bond theories are saying something very different. And I need you to hear this. These are control theories. These are about self-control. They are saying that you're born deviant or naturally deviant. In being naturally deviant, we learn to conform because it has value to us. The question then becomes not why do people commit crime, which is this question here. Why are people committing crime? It instead becomes, why don't they? Why wouldn't they? What stops anybody from doing it? We're hedonistic by nature. So stop. So why do we ever stop committing crime? And what they said, and this is Hershey and Godwardson eventually, right? They are saying that we develop self-control and social controls. And we do this through our bonds. These bonds are based on attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. Stop, please. You'll need to read about those. But how do we stop kids from committing crime? We increase the attachments. Put the dog outside, please.
She's goodbye.
She's naughty today. Give me her bone, please. So we need to keep them busy. We need to form an opportunity for them to be bonded. So actually give me her other one, please. Under the duck. Under the duck. So we do things like limiting their exposure, increasing their time with their family, developing commitments within the community. This is what a lot of people say, like, how do you prevent crime? Put them in football, right? You put them in sports, and they're developing a team mentality. They're attaching to one another. They're committed to the program and the values of the program, and they are involved, and therefore they develop self-control because it serves a purpose for them, right? It's evolutionarily, I guess, beneficial. And so I got to turn this off. Sorry. I know this dog is distracting. I just wanted to show you what's happening behind the scenes. So what do? We do after school programs. We do Boy Scouts. We do Girl Scouts. We do communities in schools. We do basketball. We do any sort of sports, church activities. What can we do to keep not them busy, but to keep them engaged and to keep them, to keep the kids invested. So I want to show this to you here. This is where it gets important. Oh, for goodness sake.
What?
So this is a visual of this. If we have attachment, commitment, belief, and involvement, then we conform. When that breaks down, notice the broken arrows. When that breaks down, it leads to criminal behavior. And actually, no, see, I just said it wrong. We have criminal behavior. We have criminal behavior. And if you develop attachment, commitment, belief, and involvement, then you have conforming behavior. You don't start with conforming behavior. You start hedonistically. You start with criminal behavior.
Mom,
No, baby, I'm doing work right now. Labeling theory, your book goes over very clearly. You need to read that and be aware. Charlie, it's time for you to be done. Go refill your water. Now, social disorganization theory has to do with the actual environment. This is really the only one that we look at that is about where the group lives. This is not about why does Joe commit crimes. This is why do people in Joe's neighborhood seem to have more criminal behavior. It's not about Joe, it's about the area. This isn't considered an aggregate level theory. So we see here that there are issues like poverty, marginalization, lack of community and lack of community involvement, and people that are moving in and out, a transient community. And when we have that, we start to have social disorganization, or some people have likened it to the broken windows theory, right? Or it kind of stems from this. And a lot of police officers will tell you that this is what they subscribe to. So I want to show you, this is, if I have to ask again, you have to be in trouble. Go sit down and watch your show. Here, this is what Shaw and McKay did. So they did the original development of this. They were in Chicago and they literally just like, here's a crime, here's a crime, here's a crime. And they found that there was an area, zone 2 is typically what it would be called, where it seems to have the most crime. And you can see these zones in almost any city where you literally see a difference between the city center, which is the activity center, the business center, and then the first residential area right outside of that. And then the farther away you go, within reason, the more affluent you became. So your goal is to kind of move a little bit out of the city center, suburbia. Too far and you hit rural, and that's a different issue, right? That's the difference between living not quite downtown, right? But you want to live in that area, and then moving out to I don't know how to say it, Burgaw, Burgaw, right? You start to go into those areas and you're going rural because of the cost. You're going rural for a different reason. So this is kind of the structure that you will see here, and it's about cultural transmission and how do we pass on these values to the group. Gentrification is a big term when we describe this, and this is present in Wilmington clearly. So these are, and I mean, I don't know where this is specifically because I haven't learned the geography yet, but I'm guessing it's around 17th Street, right? We see this area where we have predominantly non-white neighborhoods. And look at what they're doing here. They're looking at the structural conditions, and this is where they want to buy out and put new, nicer homes. What does that do? It puts these people who can afford these homes here, because we don't have a separation, a strong distinction between class and race in the United States right now. And so what happens is these people have to move out because these neighborhoods or these areas, these communities have basically outpriced them. They've made it to where they can't stay. And so if that happens, where do these people go? Well, they have to move to another zone. Now, if you like musicals, there's one called In the Heights that kind of describes this with song and dance. Strain theory is about easing tension. If you had a legitimate means by which you could access and relieve and meet your needs, access your needs and relieve your stress and tension, then you would. But when that legitimate means is blocked, then you turn to illegitimate means. If I could do it within the scope of the law, I would, but I can't. So now I'm going to violate the law. This used to be applied only to money. Now we see that there are many feelings that need to be alleviated, many many psychological pressures that exist, but it's not about stress, right? Stress is considered temporary, but it's about a long-term blocking to legitimate means to meet your needs. So turning to illegitimate means. But when we start to look at what does this mean, usually you would list what you would consider stress, right? Stressors. And this is strain theory. This is something I want you to notice. If I accept the means and I can, and I accept the goals, then I'm going to conform. If I am, let's go here. If I reject both the means, but I want the goals, I'm going to get innovative. I'm going to get innovative. But if I have to rewrite everything, fine. We start to see a rebellion. Here's another way to look at this. Here's another way to look at this. Okay. You need to watch this video. It's quick. And then just consider this as another visual way to look at this. Charlie, go put the water down for the dog, please. Here are some other theories, and I'm not discrediting those, and I'm not trying to give them less time. It's just that we don't have a paradigm in criminal justice right now, right? We don't have foundational beliefs that are considered like beyond dispute. Gravity is beyond dispute. Scientists have gravity. They have atoms. They have these kinds of things, these core concepts that are beyond dispute. We can't even define crime. We can't even define crime yet. So because we don't have these paradigms, we're still pre-paradigmatic, then we have a lot of theories that develop. And we're working towards a comprehensive theory and integrated theory, but we aren't there yet. So when you say, well, maybe I kind of think strain and, I don't know, labeling matter. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Know the difference. Know the differences. But yeah, of course you do. Of course you do, because these are not pure yet. The one that has the most support in research is actually right now social bond theory. Social bond theory seems to have the most support in research. And this is where you start, we're born deviant and we become conformist. Open the door for the dog, please, Char. What is the point of all of this? When we decide what we think causes crime, the juvenile justice system needs to look to see if the interventions based on these theories, are supported in research. Is that research quality? Is it peer reviewed? Is it methodologically appropriate and analytically sound? And if so, those are the interventions that need to be in place. If we say scared straight programs increase crime, then why are we doing that? Then why do we do that? If we know that DARE programs are ineffective, at best, they are ineffective, why are we investing in those? It makes the parents feel good. So we are seeing there that your DARE program is not supported in evidence based on quality theory and quality research. So we need to remove our resources from programs like that. And that's where you will come in, because you will know that. Next class, we'll talk about policing. This is encounters with law enforcement. And this will start after we finish all of our policing stuff, our involvement. Then we will talk, then we'll get ready for test 1. Okay. I hope, and then summaries. I hope that you are having a wonderful summer, and I will stop sharing, turn on the video, say goodbye to you. She can't take her snake out. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. And that's all I really have. Bye. She can't take her snake out.